My name is Dr. Harold Benson. I'm 78 years old, and I spent most of my life trying to prove everything in a lab. Control was my comfort, variables. My companions and faith was a thing I kept outside the door, locked. If I'm being honest, it wasn't welcome in my house, the house of reason, life. I built that house brick by brick, experiment by experiment, each one a fortress wall against the unpredictable, the unquantifiable, the messy business of belief. It was a beautiful house, I thought, clean lines, verifiable foundations, every corner illuminated by the cold, hard light of empirical data. There were no mysterious drafts, no creaks in the floorboards that couldn't be explained by atmospheric pressure. Everything had a cause, and every cause could be traced, documented, and, if necessary, eliminated. Faith, to me, was a leaky roof in a rainstorm, a sentimental story people told themselves to avoid the chilling fact that the universe is vast, indifferent, and governed by laws we could, with enough time and grant money. I didn't come here to argue with you. I've had enough arguments for a lifetime, enough debates that leave both people walking away with the same opinions they brought in, just more stubbornly held. No, I'm only here to tell you how. One night, the God I measured by silence spoke. For 37 years, I was the director of the Atherton Biomedical Research Institute. My world was the double-blind trial, the peer-reviewed journal, the sterile, beautiful precision of the scientific method. My name is on, I don't know, 100 papers, if more. We chased cellular pathways, decoded protein functions. We mapped the very architecture of life. We did good work, important work. We weren't just tinkering. We were at the frontier, pushing back the darkness of ignorance with the bright, clean flame of inquiry. But my rule, my gospel, you could call it, was ruthless. If it couldn't be replicate, if you couldn't isolate the variable and get the same result 99 times out of 100, it didn't count. It was noise, anecdote, wishful thinking. I had no patience for it. A young researcher would come to me excited about a one-off result, a statistical ghost in the machine, and I would calmly, systematically dismantle their enthusiasm. Go back, I'd say. Design a better experiment, control for X, Y, and Z. Your conclusion is only as strong as your methodology. I believed I was teaching them rigor. I now see I was teaching them a form of blindness. My late wife, Ruth, she was different. She lived in a world of grace. That was her word for it. She never pushed, never argued. She just believed, quietly, steadfastly. I'd come home, my mind buzzing with values and standard deviations, convinced I'd spent the day wrestling with the fundamental truths of the universe, and she'd be reading her Bible in her favorite chair. She'd just smile and ask if I wanted tea. She never made my world feel small. She just lived in a bigger one. I remember asking her once, early in our marriage, how she could believe stories so full of impossible events. Parting seas, men walking on water. I wasn't being cruel, genuinely curious. I wanted to understand the logical fallacy. She looked up from her book, her expression, not defensive, but life, she said. Harold, you spend all day looking at the world through a microscope. It's magnificent, but you can't see the stars through a microscope. You need a different instrument for that. I patted her hand and told her it was a lovely metaphor. I didn't understand it then, not really. That certainty I had, it cost things. It cost me my son Daniel for a long time. I was there for his birth, of course. I measured his growth on a chart. I logged his developmental milestones with the precision of a lab technician. But was I there for the school plays, the baseball games he pitched? I was often reviewing a grant proposal or troubleshooting a failed experiment. I remember one evening he came home with a drawing he'd made, a mess of colors. I told him the proportions were unrealistic for a human head. I thought I was teaching him precision. I explained the golden ratio, the placement of the eyes relative to the skull. I gave him a lecture on anatomical accuracy. He just stared at the paper, his shoulders slumped. He never showed me another drawing. I taught him I was a man who measured but did not see. We grew distant. Estranged is the clinical term, I suppose. It sounds so clean, so detached. The reality was a chasm of awkward phone calls and holidays spent talking about the weather. Now he has a son of his own, my grandson, Eli, 9 years old. A bright, wonderful boy with Ruth's smile after Ruth passed. The routines got stricter. The house had to be just so. My desk, tidy. The old lab equipment I kept in the garage, vials labeled, beakers clean. Every night the kettle clicks at exactly 9 p.m. I still make tea for 2. It's a habit, a protocol. It's what's left when the person who gave the habit its meaning is gone. The silence in the house was deafening. I tried to fill it with work, with order, with the familiar hum of machinery. I told myself I was strong, that I was carrying on with dignity. But the house. This house is loud with memories, and her Bible. I couldn't bring myself to open it. Couldn't bring myself to throw it away either. It just sat there on the shelf, a silent variable I refused to engage with, an uncontrolled element in my otherwise sterile environment. I wasn't strong. I was just busy. There's a difference. Busy is a shield. Strong is a state of being. My shield was getting very heavy. Retirement doesn't mean the work stops. They still call. Consult. An old colleague, a man I respect a great deal, sent me a draft of a new paper, a big one for a major journal. He wanted my name on it as a co-author, a final capstone for my career, he said, a legacy. But as I read through the data, something felt off. An introit seemed massaged. A few outliers were excluded without sufficient justification. It wasn't fraud, not exactly. It was ambiguous, a gray area. He was asking me to smooth it over with my reputation, lend my credibility to something that wasn't clean. For the first time in my life, my integrity and my reputation felt like two different things, and they were at war. The man who had preached ruthless precision for 4 decades was being asked to look the other way, to accept a conclusion that was convenient. It gnawed at me. Then the harder blow fell, the one that shattered the foundations. My grandson, Eli, he'd been having fainting spells. They did an EKG, then another. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday, a dangerous cardiac arrhythmia. The cardiologist was a kind young woman. She spoke gently about options, procedures, medications. I heard none of it. My mind just snapped into triage mode. I wasn't a grandfather. I was a researcher. I saw my grandson not as a frightened little boy, but as a compunction physiological system that was malfunctioning. I was already running searches in my head. Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine. I could feel the panic rising, a cold wave. I kept muttering to myself, there has to be a protocol. There's always a protocol. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and bitter coffee. I turned my study into a command center. I was going to solve it. I was going to find the variable, the overlooked study, the experimental treatment that would fix my grandson. I was going to control this. I downloaded dozens of papers. I made charts. I cross-referenced studies on ion channelopathies. I was in my element, or so I thought. But my hands trembled, my focus shattered. I was treating my grandson's life like the ultimate research problem, and it was a problem I couldn't solve. Daniel called one night. He was afraid, scared. He said the church was praying for Eli, and I snapped at him. Prayer won't change his myocardial physiology, Daniel. The words came out like acid. His condition is a matter of flawed electrical pathways in the cardiac muscle. It's not going to be rectified by good intentions. I saw his face on the video call. His eyes just hardened. The wall between us, the one I'd spent decades building, just got a few feet thicker. I hung up, and the silence in this room was immense. I had taken my son's fear and offered him a textbook. He had offered me hope, and I had corrected his science. That night, I tried something, a little experiment. I closed my eyes and I talked to the ceiling. Not a prayer, more like a challenge. A proposal for a single subject trial. All right, I said to the emptiness. If you're there, you know my standards. You know the burden of proof required. I'm not asking for a burning bush, just data. Show me something, a sign, a measurable, observable phenomenon that falls outside the established parameters of statistical noise. My no hypothesis was that nothing would happen. I was quite confident in my null hypothesis. I waited, nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the kettle clicked. So did the emptiness inside my chest. It was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. The silence wasn't just an absence of noise. It was a presence. The vast echoing void where an answer should have been. My experiment had failed, or perhaps it had succeeded perfectly. It had proven the silence I always suspected was there. It was 3:17 a.m. I know because I looked at the clock. Sleep wasn't just absent. It felt like a concept from another lifetime. I couldn't stay in the house. I felt caged. I wandered out to the garage. It's where I keep my old lab equipment, my sanctuary of certainty. A place where everything had a label and a purpose. I wasn't thinking about anything. I was just empty, numb. My hand brushed against a large beaker sitting on the edge of the bench. I watched it tilt, almost in slow motion. It hit the concrete floor, shattered. The sound was deafening in the silence. Water. I'd left some water in it, crawled across the floor. A dark spreading stain. It was crawling straight toward a power strip on the ground where the charger for my old centrifuge was plugged in, and I just froze. Stood there, watching the water get closer to the outlet, and in that moment, everything I had built my life on, my control, my intellect, my protocols, it all felt like that shattered glass on the floor, useless, broken pieces that couldn't hold anything at all. The creeping water was my own powerlessness, and it was about to hit the live current of reality, for the first time since I was a boy. A real, honest thought more. A whisper than a thought left my soul. It wasn't an experiment. It wasn't a challenge. It was a surrender. God, if you're real, I don't know what to do. There was no thunder, no burning bush, no voice from the heavens. It was a sentence laid gently inside my mind, as clear as a bell, as real as my own name, if not my own. Thought I've studied the human mind for 50 years. I know its tricks. I know the patterns of internal monologue. This was different. This was an outside signal in a closed system. Be still and know that I am God. My heart rate, which had been pounding for weeks, slowed. The frantic energy buzzing under my skin just dissolved. It was replaced by a warmth in my chest I couldn't graph, couldn't measure. It was peace, but not the peace of resignation. It was the peace of presence. It was the stillness of a deep ocean beneath a raging storm. The storm was still there. Eli was still sick, but it was on the surface, deep down. Everything was calm, and then another thought, just as clear a nudge, Ruth's Bible. I walked back into the house, into my study. I went to the shelf where I never touch it. I pulled it down. It felt heavy in my hands. It fell open to a page marked with an old faded ribbon, the book of Proverbs. And there, in the margin of the 3rd chapter, was Ruth's delicate handwriting, the note. For Harold, when your mind is loud. My breath caught in my throat. I read the words she had underlined. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. My own understanding. My God, my whole life was a monument to my own understanding. I had leaned on it so hard it had nearly broken me. I had trusted it like a god, and it had failed me. It had failed my family, and then the second word, the one that changed everything, if not from the page, from that same quiet, internal space. Truth is not a number to control, Harold. Truth is a person. I didn't see an apparition. I didn't leave the floor. I just sat there on the cool concrete of my own garage, and then here on the floor of my study, and I wept. I realized I knew a million facts, and not my father. I had spent a lifetime collecting data about the creation, and had never once sought to know the Creator. My life's work was the study of a masterpiece, but I had never acknowledged the artist. Before the sun came up, I called Daniel. My hand was shaking, but for a different reason this time. He answered, his voice thick with sleep and worry. I didn't even know where to start. Daniel, I'm sorry. That's all I could get out at first. I was there for the data, not for you. I was trying to fix the problem, and I forgot to love the people. There was just silence on the other end of the line. A long silence. I thought he'd hung up. Then I heard him take a breath, and his voice was soft. All the hardness was gone. I know, Dad, he said. I know. We prayed together awkwardly, my first honest prayer in 60 years. I asked God to forgive me. And I asked him to be with Eli. It wasn't eloquent, but it was real. The next thing I did was write to my colleague. I withdrew my name from his paper. I wrote a short, hard email about ambiguous endpoints and the necessity of unflinching intellectual honesty. I knew what it meant. Career doors would quietly close. Old friends might not call as often, and a strange sense of relief washed over me. My heart was opening. A few days later, I went with them to Eli's cardiology appointment. If I didn't bring a briefcase full of journals, I just showed up. I sat next to Eli, and I held his small hand in mine. Before the doctor came in, I leaned over and said, Pop doesn't know how to fix this, Eli, but I know the one who does. Jesus is here with us. And there was a peace in that sterile exam room that no metric could ever explain. The cardiologist laid out a plana, specialized ablation procedure. There was risk, there was waiting, but for the first time, hope was sitting in the room with us. It wasn't an abstract concept. It was as real as the antiseptic smell in the air. People think faith is the abandonment of reason. It's not. Science taught me the methodology for observing the physical world. It's a wonderful, powerful tool, but Christ, He taught me the meaning behind it all. I didn't abandon reason. I just finally yielded it to someone whose reason is infinitely greater than my own. Truth isn't a formula to be proven in a lab. If truth is a person to be known, well, you're like I was. You're brilliant, you're capable, you've built a good life, but you're starving for something you can't name. Your soul is hungry. You can spend your whole life measuring the shadows on the wall and never turn to see the light that's casting them. Ask Him to speak. You don't need a microphone. You just need honesty. If you want to try an experiment, try this one. Go somewhere quiet. Tell Him what you've been trying so hard to control, and tell Him where it's all collapsing. Open a Bible to the book of John or Proverbs. Read a few lines slowly and just pause. Then pray a simple prayer, something like this. Jesus, if you are the truth, please speak to me. I'm listening. And maybe you're not a skeptic. Maybe you believe for a long time, but you're wounded. You're hurt. You've been holding on to something, a bitterness, a regret. The lab taught me to repeat experiments until the result is stable. But grace taught me to stop repeating my sins and to accept forgiveness. I have to forgive others, to reconcile, to return. It's never too late. The God who commands us to be still is the same God who asks us to trust Him instead of our own frantic calculations. He is the truth we were made to know. I used to chase certainty. It was a phantom now. Now I walk with someone certain. If you're where I was, if you're in the middle of a storm, in a hospital waiting room, or just in a quiet house that feels too empty, Father, for the person watching right now who feels like they're holding the world together with their own two hands, give them the courage to be still. For the skeptic whose mind is loud with questions, please whisper your truth into their heart. For the caregiver who is exhausted, for the family waiting for an answer, be their peace. Remind them that you are God and they are not. And that is the best news in the world. Amen.